LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out 27 of the weekend's best clips, mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the corporate media here in the United States, meaning the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. Plus, I'll be adding in the usual quasi-news political comedy clips from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from last Friday and last night's Saturday Night Live on the topics you can see listed down in the video description. And if you're watching this as a recorded show, you should be able to see time indexes down there to skip to the topics that interest you. I'll start with a brief clip from Chris Rock's excellent Saturday Night Live monologue. Then I'll have several clips on the continuing issue with Ebola. Then more than a dozen clips on the big focus of the news shows this morning, which was the midterm elections here in the United States coming up on Tuesday, with control of the United States Senate still up for grabs. And then I'll end with several clips on that issue I've addressed over several weeks of whether liberals are too tolerant of Islam or whether others like Bill Maher and Sam Harris overgeneralize about Muslims. And that's sometimes labeled Islamophobia. And speaking of Islamophobia, I wanted to start with the clip of Chris Rock's monologue from last night talking about his fear of terrorism, specifically regarding the Freedom Tower that stands where the World Trade Center used to be before 9/11, which Chris Rock gave an alternate name over in this clip.
Anyway, you look, now they should change the name from the Freedom Tower to the Never Going In There Tower. Because I'm never going in there. There is no circumstance that will ever get me in that building. Are you kidding me? What? My God. What do they have? Does this building duck? What are they thinking? Like, who's the corporate sponsor? Target? Stop it. In the same spot, they put another skyscraper in the same spot. What kind of arrogant Floyd Mayweather crap is this? In the same spot. What businesses are they going to put in the Freedom Tower? They better put some mandatory stuff in there. Stuff you can't get out of, like the IRS, family court, DMV. Because they put a sunglass hut in there, it's going to be empty. I am never going in the Freedom Tower, man. Are you kidding me? It's the same spot. Hey, I got robbed on 48th and 8th about 20 years ago. I have not been back to 48th and 8th. No. I am never going in the Freedom Tower.
I thought that was pretty funny, and I actually thought Chris Rock's stand-up was one of the best I've seen on Saturday Night Live for a while, which I guess isn't surprising given that a lot of the hosts aren't stand-up comics, and I'm someone who's actually a big fan of stand-up comedy, and I've seen a lot of comics live, including Chris Rock, and it made me think that since the death of Robin Williams, Chris Rock may actually be the best living stand-up comedian, but of course, comedy's really subjective, so you can let me know what you think. And before I get to some more serious stuff on Ebola, I wanted to show you one more comedy clip from Saturday Night Live addressing the Ebola issue, making fun of New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, and maybe my favorite part, of course, or what of course is going to be my favorite part, is where they made fun of Fox News with a parody of Fox News anchor Megyn Kelly that started with a reference to her famous Santa Claus Must Be White controversy from last year in the opener from Saturday Night Live last night that you can see over in this clip.
Welcome back to the Kelly File. Later in the program, undeniable proof that the historical figure Blackula was in fact white. But first, it was a long week for New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. First, he placed nurse Kaci Hickox into quarantine, even though she had no symptoms of Ebola. Then he quickly reversed that decision when the White House and public opinion turned against him. Governor Christie joins us here today.
Yeah, what?
Governor, what do you say to Ms. Hickox's claims that her quarantine was inhumane?
Well, with all due respect, Megan, you need to shut the hell up. Ms. Hickox.
Now, I actually have the real news clip of Governor Chris Christie telling a heckler to shut up from last week a little later in the show when I get to the election topic that is sort of the basis for that last Chris Christie parody. But also the flip-flop from Governor Chris Christie on quarantining the nurse Kaci Hickox that I discussed extensively during my Sunday Clip Roundup last week continued to be an issue this week because not only did that nurse successfully get out of Republican Governor Chris Christie's quarantine in New Jersey, but after she ended up in Maine, she successfully fought the Republican governor's quarantine there in court, and she appeared with NBC's Chuck Todd this morning on Meet the Press, describing the goal of her lawsuit in Maine over in this clip.
Victory. What was the goal in winning this court battle for you?
Well, definitely the goal was to make sure that we are again talking about science and not politics. I just read a op-ed by Bill Foege today, and he said, when Governor Christie stated that it was an abundance of caution, which is his reasoning for putting healthcare workers in sort of quarantine for 3 weeks, it was really an abundance of politics. And I think all of the scientific and medical and public health community agrees with me on that statement, and I'm really glad that the judge also agreed looking at the law.
I actually think that's pretty cool, the part about the triumph of science over politics, and that dig at Governor Chris Christie about his abundance of caution really being an abundance of politics is pretty understandable after Chris Christie locked that nurse up in a tent with no shower and a box toilet after she just spent all those hours on an airplane flying back from volunteering to fight Ebola in Africa. But actually, it wasn't just Chris Christie choosing politics over facts among the Republicans. I think the Republican governor of Maine, Paul LePage, even after losing the quarantine in court, continued spreading fear and even attacking the character of that nurse Kaci Hickox, which you can see NBC's Chuck Todd quote to the nurse Kaci Hickox in that interview, and she gave what I thought was a pretty reasonable reaction to the politics of fear over in this clip.
Home state governor there, Republican Governor Paul LePage, said a couple of things after this order on Friday. Number one, he said, she's violated every promise she's made so far, so I can't trust her. But he said he's going to abide by the judge's position. He also said this about Ebola, and I want you to respond to this. We don't know what we don't know about Ebola, therefore I'm a little disappointed. But the monkey's on the judge's back, not mine. He made the decision. We will abide by the ruling. When you hear Governor LePage say we don't know what we don't know about Ebola, what do you say to that?
Well, I think that's a very true statement. We don't know what we don't know about everything in the world. But we know a lot about Ebola. We have been researching this disease for 38 years since its first appearance in Africa, and we know how the infection is transmitted from person to person, and we know that it's not transmitted from someone who is asymptomatic, as I am and many other aid workers will be when they return. So I hope that upon reflection, maybe he'll change his tune as well.
Now, I actually thought that was a really reasonable response, science-based, what you'd expect from a nurse, though I guess medical training doesn't always trump politics, as you can see when Dr. and Republican Senator Rand Paul answered a question about Ebola over on CBS's Face the Nation this morning. He was actually on several shows, and I'll have several clips from him. But this is where he was interviewed on CBS by Bob Schieffer, and I think Rand Paul overhyped the fear of catching Ebola on a bus by making a false comparison to fully masked and gowned nurses in Dallas getting Ebola in an intensive care ward, as I'll explain after you watch that Rand Paul clip over here.
The things hanging over this election is this Ebola outbreak. Is the government following the right policies here?
I think the president's biggest mistake was like saying, oh, it's no big deal. You can't catch it if you're sitting on a bus with somebody. Well, apparently you can be in the intensive care unit, gloved, gowned, and masked and still get it. It's very contagious when someone's sick. So I think it was a mistake for him to say, oh, it's no big deal. You can be riding on a bus and we're not going to stop any travel. American public sees people getting it who are fully masked and gowned and saying, my goodness, I don't think anybody should be riding on a bus or coming from Liberia to visit their aunt or uncle and when they could be contagious. So I think a temporary stop of travel for elective travel, if you're coming to visit your relatives, couldn't that wait for a few months?
You know.
Well, at least that proposed travel ban from Dr. and Senator Rand Paul is a pretty watered down version of what I've seen from some Republicans, but I really thought that was a false comparison between catching Ebola on a bus and those fully masked and gowned nurses in Dallas who got Ebola in an intensive care ward, especially because if you've been watching my Sunday clip roundups, you know those nurses actually weren't fully masked and gowned for some of their treatment, and they're during what was a pretty strong exposure to bodily fluids, much more intense than what you get on a bus. And also remember, the family members never got Ebola who lived for days in an apartment with the already symptomatic and contagious Thomas Eric Duncan, that one man who died of Ebola in Dallas. And in fact, in Africa, apparently a lot of the spread of Ebola comes from their burial practices of washing the dead because of the physical contact with the dead bodies of Ebola victims, which are very contagious. And you can see U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Samantha Power, who just returned from the affected countries in West Africa, talking about changing those burial practices. Also interviewed by Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation this morning, over in this clip.
Thank you, Bob. Well, first, to my surprise, there really are positive signs in all three countries. In Liberia, thanks to the presence of the CDC and the U.S. military, we see the rate of safe burial, which is a key part of the solution here, skyrocketing to close to 90% in the capital, Monrovia. In Sierra Leone, the rate of safe burial within 24 hours is close to 100%. And CDC thinks that around half to 70% of the infections may well come from unsafe burial. So you can imagine what a difference that could start to make here, you know, just in a matter of days or weeks. And the rate of improvement in safe burial came over a 4 or 5 day period just because of the injection of command and control, frankly, by the United States and by the British in the Sierra Leonean context. More and more people are getting educated. There's social mobilization that's now stretching out into the countryside. And I just got off the phone this morning with the head of the UN operation in the region, and he's done a full tour into the countryside, and he said wherever we have an Ebola treatment unit, a lab, and social mobilization, infection rates are coming way down. Where we don't, they're not. It's that simple.
So that sounds like more good news than we've heard from West Africa in a while, if you've been watching the show for the last several weeks. And, you know, I talked about some of the really dire predictions that by the end of the year there may be 10,000 new cases every week. Right now there are about 10,000 cases reported in West Africa. So I hope those positive developments that Samantha Power was talking about actually are true. And I also thought that U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Samantha Power did a good job of using science to allay fears about the transfer or the contagion of Ebola from people who've been to West Africa, because she's actually someone who's been to West Africa, and she talked about how she's monitoring herself and why she's not afraid over in the second clip from her interview with CBS's Face the Nation, and interviewer Bob Schieffer over here.
You went through screening to get back into the country. Are you monitoring, self-monitoring, or what are you doing now?
I am, in accordance with New York state guidelines, I am reporting my temperature twice a day to the New York state health authorities.
Were you in any way apprehensive about embarking on this mission?
I was not, because I had talked to the CDC, and I'm very familiar with how this disease is transmitted, and we had run our itinerary through the CDC and the Department of Health and Human Services, so we felt good about the cost benefit, about risk, and we felt we had turned the trip into something that was of almost no risk. My family, of course, even though they also know the science, the question looms in everyone's head, and you just can't help it. That's what makes us human. So, of course, even in my own family, where I've educated everybody about what Ebola is and what it isn't, people have questions, and that's, again, very understandable.
So, yeah, I thought that Samantha Power's answer there was really good about stopping some of the overhyping of the fears, although she also recognized at the end from her own family that it's just human to be a little too fearful of things, kind of hearkening back to that first clip I showed of Chris Rock saying he's not going to go to the Freedom Tower, and he doesn't go back to that corner where he was robbed many years ago. I guess that is kind of human nature, to have sort of a warped view of what is actually dangerous and what isn't dangerous. The final clip I want to show on the whole Ebola issue is another Ebola comedy clip. I guess it's kind of dark comedy. This is from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, from Bill Maher's monologue, where he tried to put the number of deaths from Ebola in the United States in some perspective, and also kind of looked at the racial aspect in a couple different ways over in this clip.
For those people panicking, let me remind everybody, Ebola has still killed fewer people in America than OJ. And, it should really not even be a political issue, which it has become. You know that there are certain conservatives now who are selling bumper stickers that say Ebola, Obama's legacy to America. I know, nice, right? They wanted to use Black Plague, but they thought it was too on the nose.
So I kind of like there the way Bill Maher sort of flipped the race card, first talking about the killings by O.J. Simpson, which of course is a big source of a racial divide, or at least it was back at the time, back in the 90s, when O.J. Simpson was tried for those murders. And then he flipped it to the racial aspects of the current election, where there's sort of a racial undertone to some of the election ads I've seen on both sides. That whole Ebola is Obama's legacy to America or whatever. That's kind of nasty. But I'll show some people who've been accusing the Democrats of playing the race card in a couple of the clips that I show on the whole election issue. And actually I have more than a dozen clips on the upcoming midterm elections. Tuesday, November 4th here in the United States. All the seats in the House of Representatives are up for election, although there are only like 30 or 40 that are contested out of 435. And then there are about a third of the seats in the U.S. Senate are up. A lot more Democratic senators are up for election this year than Republicans, and it looks like there's a good chance that the Republicans are going to take the U.S. Senate, and so they'll control both houses of Congress. And I'll get to that in a minute, but I actually haven't spent a lot of time concentrating on the midterms because it seems to bore a lot of people. And I want to show one quick joke from Weekend Update. This is one of the co-anchors of Weekend Update this season, Michael Che, another good stand-up comedian who seems to be starting to get his rhythm a little bit over on Weekend Update, co-hosting with Colin Jost. And he talks about the midterm elections, about how smart people's votes count just as much as stupid people's, and then he tries to get you to believe the midterms count, but can't seem to really believe it himself over in this clip.
This Tuesday are the midterm elections, and I know a lot of people aren't going to vote because they don't follow politics, but that's no excuse. I don't know anything about politics, but last year I voted for Mayor Bill de Blasio because I like his son's afro, and it counted just as much as a smart person. So make sure you get out there and vote next Tuesday, or this Tuesday. Whatever, who cares, man? It's the midterms. It's not even important.
So yeah, I guess Michael Che couldn't even make it through that entire joke while still believing that the midterms were important. People should focus on them, but actually there are some important issues, and like I said, the U.S. Senate is still too close to call. It could go either way. But I also, like I said, there are a bunch of racial issues that have come up in the election, and I want to show a few clips on that first. One of the big charges of playing the race card that came up this last week was from Democratic Senator Mary Landrieu in Louisiana. And she was interviewed by Chuck Todd earlier in the week and said a couple things that, of course, I saw on Fox News covered over and over again as Democrats playing the race card. And I'll show you a little of that also from Fox News Sunday. But first, here's Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press playing a clip of his conversation both with Mary Landrieu about where she played the race card and then talking to Michelle Nunn, who's running for Senate in Georgia, and talking about the race card and the gender card over in this clip.
If Democrats hold on in southern states that Mitt Romney won by double digits, it will be because they win a numbers game, which relies on African-American turnout. In Louisiana, Senator Mary Landrieu says the president is unpopular because of his energy policies, but then she added this.
To be very, very honest with you, in the South has not always been the friendliest place for African-Americans. It's been a difficult time for the president to present himself in a very positive light as a leader. It's not always been a good place for women to be able to present ourselves.
The campaign's final days, racially charged messages like these have circulated. The Georgia Democratic Party put these flyers out.
If you don't vote, we could have another Ferguson here. Appropriate?
I keep talking about Ferguson from the lens of as a mom. Because I think we all relate to it as parents and thinking about the tragic loss of a young man.
Would the Nunn for Senate campaign have put out that flyer?
It is not something that we have done, and yet I think it is something that merits a conversation by Georgia voters. I really do.
So you can see Michelle Nunn, who's running for Senate in Georgia, and who looks like she's actually going to take it to a runoff, so we may not even know who's won the Senate after this election on Tuesday. It may all go all the way to a runoff in Georgia in January for Michelle Nunn. But you can see she wouldn't quite commit to backing those ads about the race card and, we have to vote for Michelle or vote against the Republican because of the stand your ground laws. And I actually want to show it was a lot more obvious over on Fox News Sunday. They had a debate about the midterm elections. They had the closing arguments on the midterm elections from the Republican Mitt Romney, and I'm going to show a clip from him a little later. And then the Democrat they used was Senator Ben Cardin from Maryland. And this is one of the, I showed some softball questions from Fox News Sunday last week for Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey. Here's one of those really, have you stopped beating your wife, have you stopped beating your wife type questions from Chris Wallace to Senator Ben Cardin. It's kind of a long, involved question, which you'll see for yourself, but at the end it boils down to, isn't it true that Democrats are playing the race card from the bottom of the deck? That's the question boils down to that at the end. But here you can see the wind-up and then Ben Cardin trying to defend Democrats and himself from the charge of playing the race card over in this clip.
Finally, Senator, as Democrats struggle in a number of these, especially southern races, your party has turned to what some people are calling race hustling to try to mobilize the African-American base. I want to play for you Senator Mary Landrieu, who's in a tough race in Louisiana, and also an ad from your leader, Senator Harry Reid's Senate PAC, in support of Kay Hagan in her race against her opponent in North Carolina. Take a look at both of these, sir.
The South has not always been the friendliest place for African Americans. It's been a difficult time for the president to present himself in a very positive light as a leader.
Tillis even led the effort to pass the type of stand your ground laws that caused the shooting death of Trayvon Martin.
Senator, aren't Democrats playing the race card and playing it from the bottom of the deck?
What we've seen in too many races around the country, I saw it in my own race, when there were efforts made to depress the minority vote as a tactic by Republicans. That should have no place in American politics. And we're starting to see that again in some of these races. We want everyone to vote. We want them to vote for the person they think is the best candidate. Democrats are proud of our efforts to help people with the opportunity to vote. In my own state of Maryland,
wait.
voting,
Just real quick,
we've seen
sir,
a huge increase.
Real quickly, I got less than a minute left. Why does it make sense to tie Tom Tillis, who is the House Speaker, the State House Speaker in North Carolina, to the shooting of Trayvon Martin in Florida? How does it make any sense except as playing the race card?
Well, I think you're isolating one particular part of the North Carolina race. I know that Kay Hagan's
I'm just playing an paid for by your Senate leader.
Well, I can tell you that race has been run on the issues, and I think Kay Hagan and the Democrats are proud of the way that race has been run, and I believe Kay Hagan's going to win in North Carolina.
Senator.
So, yeah, you can see how Fox News framed the issue there. I mean, it is kind of a tenuous link there, but stand your ground laws, that can be an issue in a race, especially because the person, Tom Tillis there, that's his record, is on state laws. He's not already in the Senate, so you have to look at his record on state laws, and if that's, I mean, it is one of the racial hot button issues, but it's certainly not the only side where they have those racial hot button issues. And I actually want to show the next clip is from Senator Rand Paul talking about racial issues over on CNN's State of the Union with Candy Crowley. Like I said, Rand Paul was on several of the shows, and he was talking about the way he's been reaching out to the African American community, trying to actually compete for their votes, and he's gone to a bunch of places, including to Ferguson, Missouri, and I want to show how he answered Candy Crowley's question about what would happen if they don't indict the police officer who killed Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. And it's sort of a different spin on the whole racial issue this time. And you'll see that he kind of dodges the question. He won't talk about whether there should or shouldn't be an indictment, and goes to his talking points about ways he's trying to win the African American community that I'll see he talks about on other shows. But here he is using it to dodge answering the question about whether the police officer Darren Wilson should be indicted for shooting Michael Brown over on CNN's State of the Union with Candy Crowley this morning here.
Into their life.
Right, but the Ferguson case was about the killing of a young black man at the hands of a white cop. The details differ between the two sides. You have seen the rage that is in Ferguson as a result of what they say was a bad treatment by police, a justice system that doesn't work. In this specific case, what would a no bill? What if the grand jury doesn't indict this police officer? What does that mean for Ferguson?
I've tried not to weigh in on the specifics of the case because I don't know the police officer, and it's all secret, and it's grand jury, and I don't want to be the federal guy that comes in and says, oh, I know what's always right for a community. But I do want to be the one who says that let's channel this into the anger or the upset or the unease. Let's channel it into something positive. And so what I suggested when I was in Ferguson was I suggested, I want more people to vote. You want more people to vote. I will help you get more people to vote. And the biggest thing impeding voting in our country, we've talked about voter ID and all that, that's not the problem in our country. The problem is people who have had felony convictions are prevented from voting.
Right.
And I have several pieces of legislation to try to allow people to vote. And I think if they channel their energy into registering to vote, Ferguson is over 60% African American. If they would register people to vote, they can have a bigger voice in their community and
Absolutely.
a constructive voice in their community.
And people have told them that, but we're talking about a community that feels that a young man was murdered, and I put that in quotes, but that's a feeling there, that he was murdered by a white police officer. And if there's no bail, if there's no indictment of this police officer, does it not undermine what is seen by the minority community as justice? And would you be able to sell that as justice?
Right. I think that is a very difficult question and hard for someone outside. I'm not in the grand jury room. I don't hear all the evidence. It's hard for me, and I don't want to malign the police or say that the police were okay. I want to be able to say that I want to try to fix the overall unease in our country.
Long-term.
Yeah, and overall criminal justice. I have 6 different bills to try to give people back the right to vote, to try to let you expunge your record, to try to treat this more as a health problem and less as an incarceration problem. This is an indirect way of addressing the unease in Ferguson, but I don't have a specific answer where I can make everything right in Ferguson.
So yeah, you can see there that Rand Paul is going to the talking points he has about how he wants to reach out to the African American community to dodge the question of whether there should be an indictment in Ferguson, Missouri, or in St. Louis County, Missouri, of this officer Darren Wilson who shot the unarmed black teenager Michael Brown. And what I mean by the talking points is you can see he uses those same talking points over on NBC's Meet the Press to answer Chuck Todd's question about a comment he made earlier in the week about the Republican brand sucks. It was something like the Republican brand is as bad as Domino's pizza crust, which I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that clip over here.
I want to ask you something about something you said the other day in Michigan. You said, remember Domino's Pizza? It was about the Republican brand. They admitted, hey, our pizza crust sucks. Republican Party brand sucks, you said, and so people don't want to be a Republican, and for 80 years African Americans have had nothing to do with Republicans. Why? Because of perception. The problem is the perception is that no one in the Republican Party cares. So you're admitting you have a brand problem. How do you fix the brand problem before 2016 if that's the case?
Well, I think you have to show up and then you have to say something. So I've spent the last year showing up everywhere from Howard University to Berkeley to the Urban League to Ferguson to the NAACP. But showing up's not enough. We have to show that we have a policy. And you know what I'm sensing when I do show up in the African American community in our big cities? I'm sensing, and they say this to me time after time, we're being taken for granted. The Democrats don't show up, haven't seen my congressman lately. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us. And while not everybody says they're ready to become a Republican, many people say they're glad I'm there and they want us to compete for their vote.
So yeah, you can see those are basically the same talking points that Rand Paul used to get out of answering the question about Ferguson, Missouri. He used there to talk about why he thinks the Republican brand sucks and is as bad as Domino's Pizza. And I want to show one more clip from Chuck Todd's interview of Rand Paul talking about that, where he actually confronted Rand Paul about his flip-flop on voter ID. You know, he's talking about reaching out to the African-American community, while a lot of Republicans are trying to suppress the vote of African-Americans by putting these new restrictions on voters so that people who don't have a driver's license or don't have access to their birth certificate and can't afford to get a hold of it can no longer vote, and this disproportionately affects African Americans. And you can see how Rand Paul he won't actually admit that it's that there's no reason to check people's IDs when there's no real in-person voter identification or voter identification fraud, but he does say that it's not a really good issue for Republicans like I said, also in the interview with Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press over in this clip.
But this distrust of the Republican Party and the African-American community in some ways gets enhanced when Republicans go for voter ID laws, which a lot of people say is a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. You've been on both sides of this. You've said at one point the voter ID law drive was sort of overdone by Republicans, and then you walked it back. Which is it?
Well, it's kind of funny the way you describe it, because my position is pretty clear. I don't think there's a problem with showing your ID, but I do think there's a problem with Republicans saying, hey, our big issue for the campaign is going to be voter ID. Because what it creates is, and a lot of African Americans understandably remember the 40s and 50s in the South, and they remember suppression of the vote, and they equate that. So what I try to do is I say the opposite. I say I want more people to vote. I'm for enhancing vote, and I actually sponsor a bill with Harry Reid that would restore voting rights to people who had youthful, nonviolent crimes, that have served their time. In my state, there are 250,000 people who can't vote because of an old conviction. I have a friend whose brother had a conviction 30 years ago and can't vote. So I want to restore votes. It doesn't mean that I think it's unreasonable. I just think it's a dumb idea for Republicans to emphasize this and say, oh, this is how we're going to win the elections. Early voting should be out there for everybody. I'm for early voting. I'm for more voting. But I'm saying let's go to the black community and compete for the vote. Let's talk about criminal justice and school choice and economic opportunity. There are ways we can get African-American vote to come to the Republican Party.
So I'm not sure I completely buy all that from Republican Senator Rand Paul, but at least he's trying to say things that reach out to new constituencies for the Republicans, I guess. And also regarding his comment about whether the Republican brand sucks or not. I wanted to show like a good response to that from the Democratic senator who was also on CBS's Face the Nation this morning, Amy Klobuchar, and from Minnesota, and she was pointing out that it's not just like some brand problem, it's actually a policy problem. I think, the budget and immigration and reproductive justice. And anyway, you can see her make that argument to Bob Schieffer this morning over here.
Well, I think, first of all, and I respect the work Senator Paul has done on criminal justice reform, but this isn't just a brand issue. These are actually major policy differences. When you have most of the candidates from their party are actually supporting budgets that, as you know, call for tax decreases for the most wealthy when we have a budget problem in this country, and actually put more burden on the middle class with things like student loan. I don't think that's a branding issue. I think that's a policy difference. Or immigration reform. Yes, a few brave Republicans in the Senate, like Marco Rubio and Senator McCain, were willing to work with Democrats on a comprehensive immigration plan, but you see it just stopped in its tracks on the House side. Or you look at the issue of the fact that most of these people running for president on the Republican side are, in fact, they're not pro-choice. These are legitimate policy issues, and you can debate them, and I'm glad that Senator Paul has called for civility, but this isn't just, in his words, about a brand sucking. This is also about major policy differences. And I do think that there should be more of a focus in how Democrats talk about issues going forward on the economy. I think our candidates have done best. Candidates like Michelle Nunn, candidates like Kay Hagan, Mark Warner, Jeanne Shaheen, who have talked about issues that matter to their states when it comes to the economy.
Do you...
So I think that's a really good argument from Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, talking about how the Republicans have a lot more problems than just their brand, and especially on that immigration issue. That's something I've covered a lot. It's an important issue to me that I've worked on with the ACLU as a civil libertarian, hoping for comprehensive immigration reform that would get a lot of these immigrants, undocumented immigrants, be able to come out of the shadows and be full members of our community. And I want to show one clip from former Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney over on Fox News Sunday, where Chris Wallace actually confronted him a little bit with Republican failures on immigration, where the bipartisan Senate bill on comprehensive immigration reform that I covered on previous broadcasts of my Sunday clip roundup, if you've been watching over the last year and a half or so, it seemed for a while like that Senate bipartisan bill would actually pass the House of Representatives, but it totally died there because the Republicans, John Boehner, Speaker of the House, wouldn't even bring it up for a vote, even though it would have passed easily but it wouldn't have had a majority of the majority, the so-called Hastert rule. And anyway, you can see Mitt Romney over on Fox News Sunday try to defend that decision by the Republicans in the House because they're going to get a better deal once they take the Senate. And of course, one of my favorite parts of this is he misspeaks and says illegal immigration when he actually meant to say legal immigration, which I'll talk about a little more after I show you that clip over here.
After 2012, the Republican National Committee did what was called a postmortem on what they needed to do to change, to do better in the election, how to reach out more. Here's what they had to say about Hispanics. We must embrace and champion comprehensive immigration reform. If we do not, our party's appeal will continue to shrink to its core constituencies only. But, Governor, after the Senate, on a bipartisan basis, passed comprehensive immigration reform, House Republicans blocked it.
Well, what you're going to see is when you have Republican House and Republican Senate, you're going to have, of course, Democrats still vote for the bills Republicans come up with, because you can't get something through the Senate unless you have 60 votes, and that means you got to get a lot of Democrats. But you're going to see a provision, first of all, to secure the border, second of all, to deal with those who've come here illegally, and third, to make sure that our immigration policies are more open and transparent to the many people who do want to come here illegally. That's going to happen. You're going to see a bill actually reach the desk of the president if we finally have someone besides Harry Reid sitting in the Senate. So we're going to get it done. I think Republicans in the House were looking at what was coming from the Senate and saying, you know what, we can do better if we pick up some more seats in the Senate. I can't tell you whether we're going to win the Senate on Tuesday, But I can tell you we're going to pick up a lot of seats, and we have a lot better prospect of having a piece of legislation which deals with the issue in the way I described.
I don't know. I can't believe some people are saying that that guy's going to run for president again in 2016. You notice how he talked about making the system open and transparent for people who want to come here illegally, although I guess you can't really blame someone for, missing one syllable. And most of his answers were pretty, were more cogent than that one, I guess. But his whole argument didn't seem to make that much sense. But apparently he is one of the people who is being considered as another run as the nominee of the Republican Party in 2016. And actually one of the themes of the coverage of the midterm elections coming up on the Sunday morning shows this morning was the way that they're setting the stage for the 2016 elections. And I want to show, or the 2016 presidential election especially, and I want to show a clip of the report from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos reporter Jeff Zeleny, and it's actually the only clip I'm going to show from that show because it was almost all pundits talking about the election. They didn't have much in the way of newsmakers, but I wanted to show this clip from reporter Jeff Zeleny about how the potential 2016 candidates have been stumping for the candidates who are up for election this Tuesday, and he actually has a little interview with Senator Ted Cruz, and I'll talk about all of that a little more after I show it to you over here.
The campaign trail is crowded.
I'm back!
But those logging the most miles aren't even on the ballot, at least not this year's ballot.
Too many people only get excited about presidential campaigns. Look, I get excited about presidential campaigns, too.
Just this week in Kansas, Senator Rand Paul moved beyond the state's wildcard Senate race and plunged straight ahead to Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton says she says businesses don't reach out. Anybody believe that?
Jeb Bush echoed the criticism of Clinton as he campaigned in Colorado,
where she said that don't let them tell you that businesses create jobs.
The potential 2016 candidates are traveling across the country to red-hot races for Senate and governor. Hillary Clinton hit 18 states. Elizabeth Warren went to 9. Rand Paul and Jeb Bush each visited 8. Ted Cruz, just 4. And Chris Christie, as chairman of the Republican Governors Association, visited 17. But look at how often some of the top Republicans pass through the golden battlegrounds of Iowa and New Hampshire. Cruz 11 times, Paul 10, and Christie 9. They're introducing themselves to party activists and building chits for the future. When we visited New Hampshire with Cruz, he brought Republicans to their feet and made an early case for new leadership.
Does this increase your interest in running?
I do think the American people in November 2014 and also in November 2016 are going to be looking for leaders who want to work to restore America's leadership in the world.
So that sounds like a yes.
It increases my interest in doing everything I can to change the direction we're on.
While Cruz is among those inching closer to running, other big names like Elizabeth Warren are not. But she's still one of the biggest Democratic draws of the season, appearing earlier this week on The View.
Look, this really isn't about me. One of the reasons I really wanted to be here today is to talk about the importance of women voting.
Not all exchanges have been so polite, like Chris Christie's encounter with a protester in New Jersey.
Listen, you want to have the conversation later? I'm happy to have it, buddy. But until that time, sit down and shut up.
That moment and all others from this campaign will follow the candidates into their next race, which could be just around the corner. For this week.
So yeah, I had promised earlier that when I showed that clip near the beginning of the opening of Saturday Night Live where they had Bobby Monaghan playing New Jersey Governor Chris Christie telling the Cecily Strong playing Megyn Kelly that she needed to shut up, or that actually that the nurse Kaci Hickox needed to shut up, that was based on this clip of Governor Chris Christie telling a heckler to shut up who was trying to talk to him about how he had spent the aid from Hurricane Sandy. And you're going to see that clip again of Governor Chris Christie telling the guy to sit down and shut up over on CBS's Face the Nation. In their interview with Senator Rand Paul, Bob Schieffer asked Rand Paul what he thought about Governor Chris Christie telling that person to sit down and shut up. And you can see Rand Paul is answering as if he's running in 2016 for president for the Republican nomination against Governor Chris Christie, which he probably is. And I'll talk about that a little more after you see Rand Paul's answer here.
Thinking about running for president in 2016, someone else who is thinking about it is Chris Christie, governor of New Jersey. He was out on the campaign trail last week. Here's a little cut of what he said.
There's been 23 months since then when all you've been doing is flapping your mouth and not doing anything. So listen, you want to have the conversation later, I'm happy to have it, buddy. But until that time, sit down and shut up.
What do you think? Is that the right demeanor for somebody getting ready to run for president?
You know, I think this sort of bully demeanor may go over well in certain places, but I can't imagine that, I grew up in the South and we're yes ma'am and no sir and a little bit more polite. So I don't think that, I think people want someone to be bold, and there was a time when I thought, you know what, when he stands up and he says things boldly, that's kind of good. He's not taking any flack. But there can be too much of that, too. We live in a world where we have so much cacophony of voices on TV, sometimes of yelling back and forth, and I think there's a resurgence of people who want a little more civility and discourse.
So that's sort of an interesting exchange there between Bob Schieffer and Senator Rand Paul that adds to the ongoing conflict between Rand Paul and New Jersey Governor Chris Christie. And it looks like they are going to be running against each other in 2016. At least that looks like what's going to be most likely. And one of the arguments that Governor Chris Christie will probably use against Rand Paul is the fact that Chris Christie has executive experience and Rand Paul is just a senator. And this actually could be a big problem for Rand Paul because President Obama came in as a senator with little executive experience, and that resonates a lot with Republicans, especially in the primaries. And so I want to show you a clip from CNN's State of the Union where Candy Crowley asked Senator Rand Paul about that argument directly, and I think he did an okay job, but whatever. You can tell me what you think after I show you the clip from CNN this morning over here.
One of the things that we see in the political realm right now is the beginning of the shaping of 2016. We've actually probably seen it for the last couple of years. And one of the storylines is we have learned our lesson. A guy that was in the Senate this coming from your side, a guy that was in the Senate for 2 years, had no executive experience, is not ready to be president. You've been in the Senate for 4 years. Prior to that, you were a doctor. I think you described yourself to me at one point as a small town doctor. What in that resume is different than the president, the current sitting president?
I think it's sort of a sideshow to say which occupation you were before. We've had good senators, we've had bad senators, we've had good governors, we've had bad governors. I reminded people that Jimmy Carter was a governor that many of us didn't think was that great of a president.
But he had executive experience. I think that's where this
right. But our judgment was that it wasn't that great of a presidency from our point of view. So I think really which position you occupied isn't so important as I think we want people with wisdom. I think we want people who are well-read and steeped in history. People understand the tradition of both parties and of uniting the country. We also, when you think about it, one of the most important things is you want someone who's in charge of our nuclear arsenal, who's not going to be rash or reckless or eager to get into war. So I think people are looking for someone who is reasonable. But I think whether you've been a governor, they told me I couldn't be a senator because I'd just been a doctor. But as I've gotten to know people in Washington, we actually need more people who are not career politicians. We need more people from outside, not more people from inside.
And finally,
so I don't know. That seemed like an okay answer from Senator Rand Paul. The question about whether he's like Barack Obama, coming in with only experience as a senator, no executive experience, and especially in the Republican primaries, that's going to have a lot of resonance. I think another big problem he's going to have is the fact that he's in the Senate and the Senate may not get anything done. especially if the Republicans take over the Senate and they're going to have to take responsibility for getting something done. And if they don't actually produce anything, anyone who's running for president from the Senate is going to have to answer for that. And that's actually another question that Rand Paul had to answer over on CBS's Face the Nation, where Bob Schieffer asked him if they're actually going to get anything done, even if the Republicans take over the Senate. And you can see his answer over in this clip.
January is one of our first things.
Do you think that the gridlock will end? Because what I keep hearing people say, look, it really doesn't make any difference if Republicans control the Senate by 1 or 2 votes. Nothing's going to change. The gridlock will still be in place.
You know, I take Senator McConnell at his word. As leader, he's going to allow Democrat amendments, and we're going to come forward and we're going to vote on things, and we will put on the president's desk bills. I'd like to put every appropriation bill. I'd like to have 12 different appropriation bills like we historically did. Let's put every one of them on his desk and see if he'll sign them.
He lost me, I guess, at I take Senator McConnell at his word, because nothing really reasonable can follow that statement, I don't think. But a little bit later in that interview, I thought Senator Rand Paul said some more reasonable things about Bob Schieffer asked him what bipartisan things you think you could get done, and he said some things that this is, you know, there are a lot of things I disagree with Senator Rand Paul about, but I find it hard to disagree with almost anything he said in his answer to Bob Schieffer over in this clip.
Then it's up to him.
Tell me a couple of things that Republicans and Democrats could work together on.
One of the things I've talked to the president about is criminal justice reform. This means extending back the right to vote for people who made youthful, nonviolent mistakes, expunging their records, trying to make it easier for them to find employment, shortening, like, I think putting somebody in jail for 10 years for possession of marijuana or sale of marijuana is ridiculous. Some people are in jail for life. So I've called the president and I've told him I agree with commuting some of these sentences, lessening some of these sentences, treating it more as a health issue. So I think people's opinions on criminal justice for nonviolent drug crimes has changed. That's something we could do together.
I really hope Senator Rand Paul's right about that. And one measure of how things have changed on voters' views of criminal justice issues will be a California proposition that's on the ballot this Tuesday, Proposition 47, which I really hope passes. It would save California a lot of money by making all drug possession crimes into misdemeanors and petty theft into misdemeanors, so that people wouldn't be sent to prison anymore for just possession of drugs or for, you know, a small amount of theft, which actually also is often associated with people who have drug problems. And instead they can get, you know, treatment and stay in the local jail system and drug court and that kind of thing. And hopefully that'll pass here in California. And I thought it was really made me feel optimistic about possible bipartisan work between the Republican Senate, if they do take the Senate, and President Obama on doing something that would really matter to me, you know, criminal justice reform, which is an issue I think is really important. And it's also an issue that I guess is really important to Bill Maher over on HBO's Real Time. You know, he's sort of a well-known pothead, I guess, and he had someone who played a well-known pothead on his show, Cal Penn, who is famous for his role in Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle and the other Harold and Kumar movies. But he's actually something of a scholar. He has degrees, I think it's in political science. I can't remember exactly. And he's worked at the Obama White House. And Bill Maher had a long interview with him, and at the very end he asked Cal Penn to bring a message back to the Obama administration for him. And I'll talk about that a little more after I show you that here.
I want to see this movie, and you have to do something for me, was when you see Obama.
Yeah.
I mean, as half of the Cheech and Chong of your generation,
yeah,
ask him why he's so bad on the issue of pot. Because he was part of the Choom gang. And he must know that, you know, there's a lot of people who can't vote, can't get housing, can't do a lot of things, get jobs because they have that on their record, that he could have on his record because of what he did. And that's just a hypocrisy I don't think he should be able to live with. Will you take that message to him?
I may phrase it differently, but I'll see what I can do.
Otherwise, I'm with them. Cal Penn, thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you.
Cal Penn! All right, let's meet our...
So, yeah, that would be something that would be a silver lining to the Republicans taking over the Senate if that kind of sentiment came from Bill Maher, took hold in the Obama administration, and found across the aisle participation from people like Senator Rand Paul, so that there really could be criminal justice reform on non-violent drug crimes. That would be awesome. That would actually make it almost worth the Democrats losing the Senate, although I can't say it would really make it worth it, especially all the judicial appointments, especially, I mean, the same people would almost lose out because of the more harsh judicial philosophy of the people who would probably end up being confirmed as judges after the Republicans took over the U.S. Senate, because the Senate is the body that confirms judges appointed by the president or nominated by the president. So anyway, I only have one more clip I want to show on the midterm elections before I get to the whole issue of Islam and whether liberals are too tolerant of Islam, or whether Bill Maher and Sam Harris overgeneralize about Islam. But anyway, the last clip is from NBC's Meet the Press this morning. It was kind of the weirdest statistic I saw someone try to pawn off as news. You know, there was a lot of punditry talking about who was going to win and who was going to lose, and it sounded almost like sports commentary where people had their own pet theories, and that's why I didn't really take much in the way of clips from all that punditry on the midterm elections. And that's why some of the shows I have very few clips, and it's kind of a shorter show today. And one of the worst bits of punditry that didn't seem to have any basis in real empirical data that I could tell came from NBC's Meet the Press, where they were talking about this Facebook measure of whether an incumbent is unpopular based on the number of Facebook mentions, and you can see the way he phrases it is that this might be something that is actually true, and I don't know why it would be, but you can tell me what you think after I show that clip here.
We've got some interesting campaign data for you from Facebook on the states that I visited. It turns out the more times an incumbent gets mentioned within his or her state on Facebook, the worse it might be for them. Why? Because it's a sign, perhaps, that the race is not becoming a choice anymore, but a referendum on that said incumbent. Just what a sitting member does not want. For instance, in Louisiana, Mary Landrieu is getting 82% of in-state mentions on Facebook. That's not good. Same thing in Kansas, where Pat Roberts is coming in at 72%. Guess what? Both are struggling. Of the incumbents we tracked, only the North Carolina Senate candidates are close to parity. And guess what? The Democratic incumbent, Kay Hagan, is the one that's in the best shape. When we come back, what we heard from the candidates.
Did that make any sense? I mean, I understand what he's trying to say there, but it didn't seem like that I had any feeling that the data they were giving me predicted anything reliably. I don't know. You can let me know if that made sense to you down in the comment section. The last topic I want to get to, though, is this topic of whether liberals are too tolerant of Islam, and or whether possibly it is that people like Bill Maher and Sam Harris have actually been overgeneralizing about Islam as a religion and ascribing the beliefs of the more extreme elements as being the beliefs of the entire religion, or that people who all Muslims should be smeared with these extremist beliefs, I guess. And like I said last week, I'm actually planning on making a video titled Sam Harris Defamed as Islamophobic by Glenn Greenwald and Reza Eslan. And I had said that I would be finishing that, but the reason I didn't finish it is because for the context of that video, I realized I needed to go buy one of Sam Harris's books. Here it is, right here. It's called The End of Faith, because it's about whether a quote from that book was taken out of context, and I realized I needed to actually see the entire context by having a copy of the book myself. So that video should definitely be done sometime this week, since I have the book, and so look for that. But I'll probably be using some new Sam Harris clips, because he was over on CNN's Fareed Zakaria this morning, and down in the video description I put a link to the entire interview with Fareed Zakaria. But he started by giving a little background of the Islam controversy that developed over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, even showing like a little clip in the background, and what Sam Harris said, and Fareed Zakaria's response, and it sort of ties into what I want to talk about. But first I'll show that first interaction with Fareed Zakaria giving the background, and then asking Sam Harris about it, about his 20% figure on the number of Muslims who are jihadists or supporting Islamists, over in this clip.
1 month ago, the celebrated atheist, author, and neuroscientist Sam Harris appeared on Real Time, Bill Maher's HBO show. The conversation about Islam that ensued created quite a bit of controversy. Harris said, among other things, that, quote, Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas, unquote. He went on to say that more than 20% of Muslims are either jihadists or Islamists who want to foist their religion on the rest of humanity. That comes out to about 300 million people. I beg to differ and said as much when I responded with my own thoughts on the show. But I wanted to talk to Mr. Harris in person, so here he is. He's the author of a new book, Waking Up, and we might get to it. Yes. But first I want to ask you about that number, which sure. It struck me you sort of pulled out of a hat. If you do have, something in the range of 20% of all Muslims who are either jihadists or Islamists, and which implies condoning violence and such, I'm just doing the math. That comes to about 300 million.
Right.
So there were 10,000 terrorist events last year. Let's assume that 100 people, let's assume all of those were Muslim. Let's assume each event was planned by 100 people. Neither of those assumptions is right, but I'm being generous.
Right.
That comes to about 1 million people who are jihadists. So that still leaves us with 299 million missing Muslim terrorists.
Right. Well, there are a few distinctions I think we have to make here. One is there's a difference between a jihadist and an Islamist. And there I was talking about Islamists and jihadists together. And so Islamists are people who want to foist their interpretation of Islam on the rest of society. And sometimes they have a revolutionary bent, sometimes they have a more of a normal political bent. But they do want to...
The fact that somebody may believe that, for example, Sharia should obtain and women's testimony should be worth half a man's in court,
right,
doesn't mean that they want to kill people. Right?
Well, no,
those are two. Being conservative and religious, which, by the way, is not my orientation at all, but it's different from wanting to kill people.
Yes, yeah. Well, we should, again, you have to parse this on specific points, like, do you favor killing apostates? Do you think adulterers should be killed? And even among Islamists, you'd find more subscribing to one versus the other, depending on the poll you trust. But I didn't just pull the number out of a hat. I mean, there's a group at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that looked at 40 years of parliamentary elections in the Muslim world, literally every election that has occurred, and found that Islamists got 15% of the votes. So I would say that when you take this number 15% who vote for Islamist parties, and then you look at the poll results on specific implementation of Sharia law. So do you want adulterers and thieves given the traditional punishments, or should apostates be killed? You never find the number, with very few exceptions, you never find the number as low as 15% voting in favor of those punishments. It's often 60%, depending on the society. So I believe nudging that up to something around 20% is still a conservative estimate of the percentage of Muslims worldwide who have values relating to human rights and free speech that are really in zero-sum contest with our own. And I just think we have to speak honestly about that.
Now, I have a lot of problems with that, which I will expand on more in this edited, produced video that I will be uploading this week based on this book here and some other clips that I'll be using, and probably using that clip. But just the whole idea that there's this that he's basing it on elections in the Muslim world, which aren't necessarily the most free elections, and the people who are voting for Islamist candidates, could be voting for those candidates for a variety of reasons. And then also these public opinion polls, which I also have some questions about their reliability. And as to the most important part about the argument that Sam Harris is making, and that what's over in this book that he then tries to defend later and sort of backtrack a little on, is the really strong connection he makes between belief and people being dangerous. Even if you don't really have evidence that they're planning to attack you imminently, he still thinks that they're really dangerous and maybe even worthy of being bombed if they can't be captured. That's basically what I'll get into in this video that I'm going to be making this week. But I want to show one more clip from his interview with Fareed Zakaria on CNN this morning. Fareed Zakaria's GPS is the name of the show. This is where Fareed Zakaria pointed out that Sam Harris and kind of agrees with Osama bin Laden about what jihad means, because there are different interpretations of that, but you'll see Sam Harris argue that, you know, the bin Laden interpretation is the most honest interpretation. And, you know, I think it doesn't really take into account that, you know, all these Abrahamic religions, the, you know, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all have these really nasty, aggressive, militaristic passages in their holy books, and they've all been interpreted many different ways over, you know, even in the case of Islam, it's 1,000 years or more than 1,000 years from, what is it, like 700, right around there, that Islam first started to spread. And, you know, the other religions, even more years. And anyway, here you can see Sam Harris try to say that bin Laden's interpretation of jihad is the most honest interpretation after he gets questioned on that topic by CNN's Fareed Zakaria over in this clip.
Matter. And one of the details here is that a belief that in Islam that the one true faith has to conquer the world through jihad, essentially, and that free speech.
But jihad means different things to different
again,
people.
It doesn't. I agree with you that we have to convince the Muslim world, or get the Muslim world to convince itself, that jihad really just means an inner spiritual struggle. That is the end game for civilization.
Right.
But the reality is, an honest reading of the text and an honest reading of Muslim history makes jihad look very much like holy war.
So in that sense, the problem is you and Osama bin Laden agree. Because after all, you're saying this is his interpretation of Islam is correct.
Well, his interpretation, this is the problem. His interpretation of Islam is very straightforward and honest, and you really have to split hairs and do some interpretive acrobatics in order to get it to look non-canonical.
But do you really think that the path to reforming Islam is to tell Muslims that their religion is the motherlode of bad ideas, that they should become atheists or symbolic followers, or nominal, I think was the word used,
right.
Nominal followers? I mean, do you really think that 1.6 billion devout Muslims are going to go, oh, damn, of course, Sam Harris is right, my religion is crap, and I should just abandon it?
No. Well, I slightly misspoke there. I didn't mean nominal followers in the sense that only Muslim atheists could reform the faith. What I meant is followers who don't take these specific dangerous beliefs very seriously and want to interpret jihad as an inner spiritual struggle as opposed to holy war.
But do you think you're helping them, or you're making it harder for them by as I said, adopting the Osama bin Laden interpretation?
I'll tell you who's making it harder for them. Liberals who deny the problem. I get emails.
Liberals, it's the fault of liberals again. That you know, like I said, I set this up at the beginning. Are liberals too tolerant of Islam, or is it people like Sam Harris and Bill Maher who are overgeneralizing about Islam and, you know, saying Osama bin Laden's interpretation is the only honest interpretation? And actually, over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher actually had a Muslim on to talk about the Islam issue. And actually, down in the video description, I have a link to the overtime segment. I'm going to show you a clip from. He had on this foreign policy analyst who's a Muslim, a liberal Muslim, Rula Jabreel, and she tried really hard to defend the Muslim side. And Bill Maher actually cut her. If you watch the regular show, Bill Maher actually cut her off and wouldn't let her finish. And she brought the topic up again over on the overtime segment And actually, over on the Real Time channel on YouTube, I think about half of the program is available for free. I think including the entire exchange between Bill Maher and Rula Jabreel from the main show, and of course the entire overtime segment, which is like 8.5 minutes, that wasn't broadcast on HBO. And I'm going to show you, here's the argument from Rula Jabreel about how they're generalizing from like the Saudi Arabian Wahhabi version of Islam and forgetting all these other all these other interpretations, and that is, not fair to Islam. And you can tell me what you think about that, and I'll tell you what I think a little more about it after I show you that clip here.
When you talk about Islam, actually, you should talk about Saudi Arabia. You should talk about Wahhabism, which is the real ideology of Al-Qaeda, of ISIS, of Boko Haram, of Shabab. This is the ideology that I have, and I think you should understand the difference between historical Islam and the first ISIS state. That's called Saudi Arabia. 1932, they decided they will get rid of all interpretation, all the school of laws, Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali. They didn't care about those. They wanted to go directly to the source, Quran, Hadith, literal interpretation. The way you interpret it, it's the way they interpret. They see violence. This is what they see. This is what they've been exporting, but we didn't do anything about it. This is a country that gave us bin Laden. This is a country that gave us 15 of the 19 hijacker of September 11. This is the country that actually is financing over and over. But we don't do much about it because it's harder. What we do, go after ordinary Muslims and harass them. This is what we do. Not only that, we have to also to stand up to another country that is Egypt.
Yeah, you can see there that the crowd again is starting to laugh because they think that she's going on too long trying to defend Muslims like she did in the regular show. They definitely, all the other times the issue of Islam came up, there weren't even any Muslims there to defend the Muslim side. So I think that the crowd shouldn't have been so hard on her for trying to filibuster a little and give her side of the story. And there was this other free speech issue that's come up because of this, because Bill Maher had previously been invited to speak at UC Berkeley in December. I think it's December 20th, at the December commencement for people who graduate halfway through or whatever. And then after this whole Islam controversy, some people have asked the invitation to be rescinded, and anyway, apparently he's still going to speak there. I'm hoping I might even be able to get tickets because my wife is an alum of, I think alumna is the correct Latin conjugation, isn't it? I messed up when I said I was an alumni once of my university instead of saying an alumnus. Anyway, Bill Maher addressed the whole issue and explained what had happened, and this is a little over 3 minutes. And actually, this whole thing is also available on the Real Time channel on YouTube, but I'm going to show it to you here and then talk about it a little more before I end the show. This is the final clip of the night. Bill Maher talking about free speech and liberals at UC Berkeley and the subject of Islam, and whether it should get him disinvited as a commencement speaker over in this clip.
All week long, I've had all these requests for interviews about this. Let me just get out my statement about it, because that's what I've been asking, and I said I would save it for HBO, because they pay me. So here's what happened. A couple of months ago, I was asked to deliver the commencement speech for Berkeley's December graduation. I was like, great. I love Berkeley. I'm off in December, and it'll be a sentimental journey. Who doesn't remember their graduation in December? But whatever, I'm happy to do it, because though I never attended Berkeley, I was very aware of their place in the American debate, on the far left. And in a country where the Democratic Party is sold out to the center and even the right, this is what is needed. This is why I wanted to accept this invitation. And they invited me because it was the 50th anniversary of something that is legendary on that campus, the Berkeley Free Speech Movement. I guess they don't teach irony in college anymore. And then a few weeks ago, Ben Affleck was on our show, and we had a discussion about Islam that I've had 1,001 nights with a lot of other people. But he's an A-list movie star, so now our very deep media started to care about it. It's always easy to do a story about somebody being mad at somebody. So when a few thousand people online who didn't have to do anything more than click a button, who didn't even go to Berkeley necessarily, wanted me to be disinvited as the commencement speaker because, you know, I'm a racist. Right, because Islam is a race. You know, this is the level of logic we're dealing with. By the way, even Reza Aslan, my most strident critic, has gone to pains to say he doesn't think I'm a bigot. Here's what he said on HuffPost Live. He said, Bill Maher's not a bigot. I know him. We are friends. We hang out with each other backstage. He loves having me on the show, despite the fact that he disagrees with me on a lot of things, and that shows the kind of person that he is. If even my most respectable critic, who's a Muslim, says this, what leg does this protest have to stand on? He and I disagree on some stuff, but he's always welcome on this show. That's how it's done, kids. Whoever told you you only had to hear what didn't upset you? So anyway, the university has come down on my side, saying what I hoped they would say all along, which is that we're liberals. We're supposed to like free speech. So I want to come. I'm planning to come. I'm planning a trip to the Redwoods the next day. My only reservation in not coming is the argument that it will be a media circus and turn what should be a day about the graduates, which it should be, you, into something else. I don't want to do that. It's the only reason I would ever pull out. But let me say this to those students worried about that. I promise, this will be your day. This is a commencement speech. The issue is you. My speech is, I hope, going to be about you and whatever tips that I thought could I actually help you in life, because I already lived through it. That and my hunk about how Jewish women hate to have sex. So here's my final plea to you liberal, in the truest sense of the word, college students, not just at Berkeley, but all over the country. Please weigh in on this. My reputation isn't on the line. Yours is. Okay, so what do you think?
So what do you think? That's what Bill Maher just asked there. I mean, in general, I don't think he should be disinvited for the comments that I've seen him make, even though I disagree with those comments, and I think that they are Islamophobic. But I don't know. It's a difficult line, you know. The Rula Jabreel was also involved in the discussion after that. I didn't show what she said, but she actually argued against Bill Maher being able to speak at Berkeley because it was a commencement speech, not a debate. She said the students who were asking for him not to speak at commencement were asking him to appear at Berkeley, but in a two-sided debate with someone who could counter his arguments about Islam. And she said, well, you know, would you let an anti-Semite give a commencement speech, someone who had made anti-Semitic comments or, you know, racist comments? You know, I thought that was a kind of simplistic refutation from Bill Maher, saying they say I'm a racist for what I say about Islam, although Islam isn't a race. Well, yeah, racism isn't the right word. That's what Ben Affleck said. So, but you know, when I was defending the arguments of the anti-Bill Maher side when Ben Affleck was on, I actually was mainly defending the arguments of Nicholas Kristof. No one even talked about what Nicholas Kristof said, because Ben Affleck's arguments were kind of simplistic in the clash with Bill Maher. But Nicholas Kristof said some things that were a lot better and a lot closer to what you saw Rula Jabreel say there about, you know, the diversity of Islam that was being generalized. And anyway, like I said, I'll make that argument a little more clearly in this edited, produced video I'm going to make, where I look at Sam Harris's defense claiming he was taken out of context, but I'm going to look at the actual context here of his book, and I don't think the context actually saves him when he says, you know, that some beliefs are so dangerous that they, you know, justify killing people, is basically the quote. And I think he doesn't really justify it with his context. And Anyway, I'm done with the show here, but I have a few extra minutes for once to go look through the comment sections. I'm always appreciative of those of you who've shown up for the show live. It's almost 100 of you this week, and I've been reading the comments along the way. As usual, I noticed that you're mostly arguing with each other and just commenting on what I said, but let's see. Samer Abdel Wahab says, liberals like free speech, correct, but not bigotry. Well, I mean, the thing is, it depends on exactly what forum you're talking about. In a public forum, and UC Berkeley as a public university, if they open up their, like if they open up the plaza there, Sprawl Plaza at UC Berkeley to anyone to come and speak, then they have to let the KKK come, and they have to let the right-wing Christians come, and the atheists come, and if a government opens up a public forum, they can't discriminate based on content or viewpoint. Now, a commencement speech isn't a public forum. It's not everyone invited to come and say whatever they want to say. On the other hand, if to disinvite someone, to revoke an invitation based on someone's viewpoint or the content of their speech, I mean, if it's really offensive, that's kind of a tough line to draw, and especially given what Bill Maher said, that he's not even going to talk about Islam. It's going to be like one of those speeches where he gives tips to graduates. And I mean, I was thinking, think of this hypothetical. What about the guy who played Kramer on Seinfeld, Michael? I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. I'm really bad with names, as I mentioned on previous episodes. But what if after he made all those racist comments, if he was supposed to give a commencement speech and they withdrew their offer based on him making racist comments in a stand-up comedy routine, would that be justified? I mean, it's not quite as bad as what Bill Maher said, and I know a lot of the people who are my viewers agree with Bill Maher's point of view on Islam, but I think it is an overgeneralization, and it's a smearing of nonviolent Muslims for the extremist views of the minority. So I can see why someone might rethink an invitation to a commencement, which is kind of a captive audience. Although I want to make clear before I end here that I definitely support the free speech right of Bill Maher to go and speak at this commencement. I don't think that in this particular case the invitation should be withdrawn, but I can see those arguments and how there is a line that has to be drawn somewhere where someone could make a comment so offensive that you wouldn't want them to speak at your commencement. I just don't really think Bill Maher's crossed that line, even though I disagree with them. So you can let me know what you think, and I'm going to, let me see if I can find one or two more quick clips. Not really. Broad Two Man says, asked about the 3-hour interview between Sam Harris and Cenk Uygur on Young Turks. Maybe I will check that out before I finish the video I'm making this week. Especially if I can download it and I can watch it at double speed. I'm much more willing to watch long videos if I can watch it at double speed. And I notice you don't really, there are very few times I feel like I have to slow down to not lose the content. People, I don't know, maybe you should download my video and watch it at double speed. I've watched my videos at double speed and I certainly don't lose any content. I should try to talk faster, right? And speaking of talking faster, I should finish up the show and thank those people who've donated through my support LiberalViewer link that is on my channel page, youtube.com/LiberalViewer. And if you're watching this as a recorded show, wrong way, up in the corner here, there should be a little eye that if you hover your mouse over that, you can click on it and donate to my channel. And I've gotten enough donations that I'm still sticking at only commercials or ads in the recorded show every half hour instead of every 15 minutes. if you're thinking of donating, there's this weird formula where if you donate $1, I think it's like 26% of it goes to YouTube. If you donate $5, only like 8% goes to YouTube. It's like, because it's 5% of your donation plus 21 cents. So that's like 26% of $1, but it's only like 8% of $5. So I especially appreciate those people who make their donations so that most of it doesn't go to YouTube, or less percentage goes to YouTube and more of it goes to me trying to keep this channel going every Sunday and picking out these clips for you. And I hope you enjoyed the selection this week and the topics and the way I put it together and the commentary. And I certainly appreciate those of you who showed up to watch it with me and keep me company as I played the clips. And I'll be doing it every Sunday for the foreseeable future. And next week will be a wrap-up, I'm sure, of whatever happens in the Senate. May still be a cliffhanger because there's runoffs in Georgia and Louisiana that may mean that we don't even know who has the Senate. But join me next week, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Hopefully I'll be starting close to on time like this week, and we can talk about what happened over the week and the big political news, and hopefully the clips I pick out will leave you a little bit more informed about what the corporate media here in the United States thinks is important, and there'll be a little bit of political comedy, I think real time, not Saturday Night Live next week, so join me for that, and I'll be seeing you all around the internet.